All right, Jan, welcome, and welcome to everyone. Today we are going to talk about sales playbooks, and more specifically how to build and use a sales playbook. And I think Jan, you're going to answer that question today. And you always like to have interactive webinars. So
That's right.
if you have a question as an attendee, drop it in the chat, and I will find a good moment to interrupt Jan. And so let's go.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. Yes, I also like interactive webinars. So if you do have any question, then post it, and we'll make sure to address it. So today I want to talk about a couple of aspects surrounding sales playbooks. First, a brief backgrounder. I've been running sales teams mainly in software for the past 20 years. Initially as CEO of a software company that I grew to about 80 people. And after that, as a coach to about 35 other SaaS companies where I coached the sales teams to really develop a process to be able to scale their business, because I believe that based on experience that without a sales playbook, it's very hard to create a scalable and predictable sales organization. And we're going to address today a couple of issues of classic problems with the classic way of building a playbook. And just to set the scene, the classic way of building a playbook is to either yourself or with a consultant, maybe a sales trainer, create a sales playbook, which is typically done in Microsoft Word or in PowerPoint or in whatever your favorite tool is to create content. And I've seen that those results are typically pretty good. So what's created in those playbooks, very often 50 to 100 pages, really covers well what the sales process for that company looks like. However, the problem typically comes when you're done with that playbook. So rolling it out is difficult, and then enforcing your team to use it and apply it on a day-to-day basis is also very hard. And then the third aspect, monitoring, so that you can give your sales teams feedback on how they're doing, is also very difficult because of the static tendency of the traditional playbooks. So today we're going to look at a more interactive version of the playbook. And I want to propose to, if you guys are okay with that, to turn this demo upside down. So I'm going to begin with a sales employee running a sales playbook. And then once I do that, then you have an idea on how a sales guy would use it. I'll talk about building your own sales playbooks, and I have some suggestions based on my years of building those playbooks on how to address that, if that's okay with everyone. I see everybody nodding, so I assume so. All right, so if as a sales employee I log into this application that we're using here, then I see a list of all my potential playbooks, because we could be having customer onboarding playbooks, employee onboarding. But today we're going to focus on the sales playbook. And within the sales playbook, I have two options. And by the way, today I'm trying to avoid using PowerPoint. So I'm trying to make this as interactive as possible. So I sort of pre-built a playbook that I've been using in the past in a software company. Of course, no two companies are the same. So some things may apply for your business, your product, your market, and some may not. So the sales playbook I'm going to show you is one that is typically applied for mid-sized to larger deals, where the sales process takes 4 to 6 weeks, and where you typically have multiple times contact with your prospects. So the first time could be incoming lead, qualification call, then a discovery call, then a sales demo and or presentation, and then to close the deal. That's sort of the background of this specific playbook. So as a sales employee, I would come in here and hit run, and then I can give it a specific name. So let's say that I'm going to give a demo to Sony. So usually you would run one playbook for every prospect and or opportunity that you're working on. So if you're in a business with large, mid-sized to large deals, then your typical sales employee would usually be working on maybe 10 to 20 playbooks at one given time. And you run one copy per prospect so that you can store and interactively view all the data that you've been collecting while you're running that playbook. Then you can also assign it to somebody. So if you as a manager are assigning it, you could assign it to a colleague, or you can just assign it to yourself. And then you set a deadline. You mainly do this for purpose of tracking the progress within your playbook. What is the velocity that we're creating in a playbook? And this way you can really start to create a predictable and scalable sales model by tracking, are our predictions as accurate as we were hoping for? So if we're typically looking at 4 weeks, that's what I'll put in here. And then I can also start tracking that deadline. Now we're in our playbook and we're in the run mode. So that means that all the content here is by default read only. However, if I need to edit it, so let's say I've now inherited my standard sales playbook. So if we go through here, this is the standard way that I want my sales team to go through a sales process. However, if we decide, Sony is maybe a very large or a very different deal, then we can come in here and also make changes to this specific playbook without affecting others. And I'll show that at the end how that is done. So typically, as a sales employee, you would now come in and follow this process. And if you're fairly new to the company, then you would frequently read all the content here in the middle. So this is really the knowledge. And on the right-hand side, we have all the actions that the salesperson needs to take, and that we as sales management want the salesperson to take in order for him to be successful, and also for us to track what the results are of this approach. And if we need to make changes in this approach, because these playbooks are living documents. If you find, based on an initial process that you design, that your teams change or they need to use a different process, then you can easily come in, and I'll show that again a bit later on, how to change playbooks and then deploy them to all your users. So typically, the process that I designed over the past years for software companies is a series of steps and a series of patterns that I want sales teams to go through. Keep in mind, a playbook is not a replacement for training. So I still thoroughly encourage professional sales training. And there are plenty of sales trainings out there. Once you've adopted a system, then I also strongly encourage you to use that in your playbook, so that your training and your actual playbook use the same language, the same terms, the same definitions. These are the definitions that I came up with over the years. And I'm going to make this template available to you. So if you kind of like this way of doing things, then you could just copy this approach. All of this content is freely available to you. Or if you completely want to change it for yourself, then you can use this as a starting point. As a sales employee, I've now gone through this introduction and I've read and understood, so I'm ready to go to my second chapter. And typically, this is the sales process I find is the best way to sell a mid-sized or a large software product to potential prospects. So it begins with building relationships. So it's typically building rapport, active listening, body language, all those kind of aspects, and really finding out about the people you talk to at your prospect, how they communicate, and then adopt your communication for it. And then later on, we go into reasons to do business. That's really the qualification part. How do we figure out if this prospect is qualified, and vice versa? Can we lead the prospect to figure out if we have the right solution? And that's mainly done in the chapter strategic questioning, where you ask the correct questions for your product, for your business, for your market to convert them. Then you want to figure out a decision: who's going to decide, when are they going to decide, how are they going to decide, those kind of steps. Then budget, is there a budget? Are they prepared to spend the money on us? Who's all involved in the budget step, etc. A bit of a mix sometimes. And then we go for the commit and the presentation or the demo. And then we have one separate chapter on objection handling. Typically, how I like to lay this out, so you really have a rich editor here, and I'll show in a second how you can edit, but you can have any kind of content here, whether it's text, formatted text, links, and videos. I try to keep this text not too long, because then people will not read it as frequently as I would like them to, because I usually want every time that they're, let's say they're preparing a visit to Sony, for them to briefly glance over this. Okay, I need to think about this in a meeting. I need to think about this in a meeting. Now let me think about my my disk color. So let's say that I'm an I. I'll put it in here. So for every sales prospect, you encourage your team to put in this data here, so they actively think about, okay, I'm an I, my prospect is, let's say, a D. How would I adopt my communications towards them? Well, I know that a D is very direct. So as an I will try to be more direct, try to be more direct, and I will try to talk less, because people with an I tend to talk a lot. And this way, you as a manager can also come in here and then see if your employee possibly needs training, because they're not analyzing what the disk is of there, and with some content in here on how to figure out what color somebody is. And you can then also actively let your employees think about how to adopt their communication and go on with that. So, okay, we find now that we've completed this checklist, and I encourage you to build checklists in such a way, don't make them too long, because then people will start not filling them in, but at least collect the data that is critical for your business to keep your prospect moving either deeper into your funnel or up in your funnel or even out of your funnel, by finding out what your criteria are to do that. If there are any questions coming in, by the way, Johan, I hope you will interrupt me, because I can't see the questions channel.
Yes, I will do.
All right. Okay, then the next step that I like to go through is reasons to do business. And again, here at the top, I've sort of a brief recap. And again, this does not replace training. I still assume and hope that you're training your sales teams about how to figure out reasons to do business. But there's a brief recap, and there's a movie that I found on YouTube that I've linked in here, so that if maybe they're fairly new to the company and they want to catch up on this topic before they go into the meeting with the client, and then at least they start thinking about the items in the checklist. So what is the trigger for this? What is the main trigger for this prospect that they're talking to us? Let's say software is outdated. And then, based on the training on how to find out what the real pain is, we would like to figure out what we think, and this is done typically both before and after the meeting, is what issues does the prospect have, or do we think they have with outdated software, and then which questions did I prepare based on those issues. If your software is outdated, maybe that's not an issue at all. Maybe it's just looking old, or maybe it's outdated. There are green screens, and new employees, when they come in, say, I don't want to work with the software. Now it's starting to begin like a pain. So we could be asking questions around that. And this is the place where people will put in questions they prepare before they go into the meeting. And obviously, reality can always be different than what you think upfront it is. Maybe other pain came up than you thought upfront would be coming up. So here you would also be filling in as a sales, what questions did I actually ask in the session, so that you can keep track of those and share that knowledge within your team. And as you can see, you can resize those boxes handily if you need to put in more content. So that's what you do there as a sales employee. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a question from Michiel. He asks, is there in the future a possibility to integrate playbooks in the CRM tool that you're using per customer, or per type, or any other sort of integration?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. Yeah, and we are actively talking with our customers on how we should build that. So is it coming? Absolutely. How is it coming is something we're now prioritizing, and also figuring out which CRM systems should we do first. Yeah, but this is definitely a high priority for us, that all this collected data is also pushed back into your CRM, and vice versa, that you can pull your CRM data into a playbook.
Yeah, and also a use case may be that a sales playbook will be triggered automatically when a new deal is created in your HubSpot pipeline, for instance. So that's definitely one of the use cases on our backlog.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Cool.
All right. Then the next step I like my sales teams to go into is really in asking the right questions to the prospect in an honest, in a fair way, asking the questions to come to the real issue at the customer. Because typically when you go into a meeting with a prospect, they never bring you the real problem. They bring you symptoms. If you are even getting symptoms, if you're talking to red people, it may even be hard to get symptoms. So with proper training, and there are many trainers that train this, you can train your sales team to start changing the classic way of selling, features, benefits, into the opposite, in mainly asking the prospect questions to understand his situation, to understand his problems, and then qualify if we are a right fit, or maybe we are not. So that's typically the process, again, with a small video if they need to get up to speed, with an example role play. There are thousands out there on YouTube. So depending on your preferred sales method, I would put different movies in. One thing I always like, especially with large deals, I mean, if you're selling a smaller product, then you may be focusing your role play more on what are typical questions or blockers I get on the phone, and then I always want my sales team on a regular basis to role play situations, and in particular, I train them to focus on where they failed in the past, and then to replay that with a colleague, and then to figure out ways how they can improve those steps. So if this deal is important enough, I want them to role play the specific situation they expect, to commit that I will, as a sales promise, to let my prospect do 80% of the talking by asking the right questions. What statements do I expect from my prospect that he is going to be making? And that could be a statement like, your price is too high. So I really want my sales teams to write them down so they can start focusing on, they are probably going to say that, I should be prepared for those kind of statements. And also questions about that, because usually a sales guy, once they're a bit experienced, for 60 to 80% can estimate what this prospect is going to bring up. So then preparing is really the best way to go in. So maybe an expected question is, how fast can you implement? And then instead of coming up with answers, we want to train our sales employees to return a question. For example, on how fast can you implement? Then you could train your sales teams to say something like, well, thanks for the question, but why is this important in this stage of the conversation? Or you could say, oh, great question, why is that important to you? Or you could say, what does fast mean for you? Because maybe in your mind, fast means 1 day, and in their mind, it means less than a year. So by returning a question, you can really start getting an interactive discussion with your prospect and engage them and qualify them better for yourself as well. Then in the decision step, I like to focus on the traditional 6 WH questions, and get answers to those to have a complete a decision step. So I always like to remind my sales teams by having this brief text over here that those are the things you want to figure out. But we also want to realize in today's reality that there's not a single person going to take a decision. Decisions are always taken on multiple layers. I like to compare it to a movie. There's always one star player. He takes the final decision, but may not be that important in the decision. it could be a CEO that has to give a final stamp on buying a product, but maybe is not involved in the buying process at all. And then there's a series of co-stars who have a big influence on the decision. Then there is supporting cast, maybe the people that are going to use the software. And then there are extras, maybe things like IT teams that have an influence on the decision, but are not going to use the software at all. It's good to identify those. And that's why here in the checklist there's an item. I've put that in for the people to check on. And then the next step I always like to go through is budget. Typically, only if you've done figured out, are there reasons for us to do business? If we find no reasons to do business, then I think we should go back there to reasons to do business. So if a prospect in very early and in a sales cycle begins asking about price, then I will say something like, happy to talk about price, but I feel it's a little bit early, so I wouldn't know what I have to offer you. But I have a few questions, if you don't mind, and then go back to the reasons to do business and figure out if there is a reason to do business. Typically, once you have gone properly through those steps, you will find some issues, and then you would usually begin with a recap. So if I understand correct, dear prospect, you have pain A, B, C, and this is causing D, E, and F. And this is costing you 150,000 per year. Am I correct? So what I want my sales guys to do then is to describe how the recap went. And this really enforces them on, because sales guys often tend to skip this step. By having them describe how the recap went, you're getting very valuable feedback, not only on how and what they're saying, but also enforcing that they don't forget to go through this step. And then, of course, if there is a budget, fill it in here so that you have an idea about that. And often with larger products, if I recall my time at Servoy, we would often initially sell a proof of concept because it was a fairly large decision for a customer to take. So then I also want to find that out here in the sales process. Are we selling a proof of concept or are we selling a full implementation? Then we would go into the commit and present step. And the commit and the present step is actually a step that I have a separate playbook for that I'm also happy to share with you guys, which is called Sales Demo Playbook. You could link that here and then go into that. But really the essence here is, what is I always want sales teams to have a mutual commitment before entering a demo. And the mutual commitment typically looks something like this paragraph over here, where you agree. Well, first of all, you give your prospect the permission to say no. If during or at the end of the demo you think this is not a fit, are you okay telling me no thanks, but you're not going to do it? Then you wait for your prospect to answer, and then you say, on the other hand, if we do see a fit, are you okay in taking the last 2 minutes of this meeting to agree on a clear next step? If you're afraid that it's going to be a wishy-washy clear next step, then you could also add here, and the clear next step could be that you begin a demo, or that we agree on the contents of a proof of concept, or that we agree on a date of a proof of concept. So whatever options you have in the clear next step that you as a manager want to enforce is what you would put in this snippet over here. So here I would, as a sales employee, say, okay, I did run, and this was the mutual commitment script, and I could paste this sample one here and adopt it for my personal talking style. And the clear next step we agreed upon is demo, or maybe start a trial tomorrow. And actually, for this kind of question, I realize now that I should probably also then add a follow-up date field, which you can do in a checklist. You can also add dates in. And then last but not least, this is more a page you could be using throughout the project, because maybe with Sony we're having 4 or 5 meetings, and going through this with your sales team is also important. What objections am I going to expect this prospect to give me? How am I going to react? What are the objections we actually got? How did we handle them? And the last one is one of my favorite ones, is really to enforce that your sales teams continue role-playing objections on a continuous basis with each other or with you. Is something you should strongly encourage, and by frequently asking that question, you can get them in that mode. So that's in brief how a sales employee would be looking at a playbook, and once he's done, he can hit complete, and then it goes off of his to-do list. But if it's still in progress, let's say we haven't closed Sony yet, then for that sales employee, it's going to be here in the running playbooks section. So typically you have a library, which are your master playbooks, the running playbooks, which will typically contain many instances of what you're working on. As you can see, you have your completed ones, so these are done. So I'm finished with these, but I can still go back in those playbooks and look at the data that I collected. And then there's drafts, which is where if you're still building a new playbook and it's not ready yet, then it's in your drafts tab. And I think next week we're also releasing a library of templates, in which the playbook that I just showed is going to be available in a new tab called templates, which as of next week you guys can use as well. So if you want to use my sales playbook template for you as a starting point, then next week you can go to templates. And what then happens, if you like the template, is that you can hit on edit. And when you hit on edit, you can now come in and completely customize this. So essentially you can do two things. You can start from scratch, which can be a lot of work. If you say, well, maybe I can reuse 50% of what has already been built, then you can just come in edit mode in this playbook and change all the content that you want. This is just a text editor. You could add additional paragraphs or texts or movies, or maybe put in your own introduction movie, maybe put in your own diagram. This is just a standard text editor where you can put in any kind of image or video. And then the same applies for checklists. So if you want to add an additional item, maybe you want to ask a question here, you could say this is a short text question. Do you feel ready? That's a little bit of a silly question, but that's how you would essentially add a question, and then at runtime the user can fill in data in that item. So checklists can be as long as you want to. My experience is if you can try to keep them brief enough that you at least collect the data that you need or want your salespeople to think about, that's the best approach. But if you can have less items, then that's the way to go. And then in terms of chapters, yeah, you can. This allows you really to separate the content out in different sections, so that people can really focus on what they're doing. The other thing is, the other suggestion I have is also to try to keep this content compact. As I mentioned before, you don't necessarily want this to replace sales training. Maybe if you have a complex product that you want to link in other sales playbooks, so you could have, like I have a separate demo playbook, you can link in smaller tasks as their own playbooks, because maybe you have let's say your typical account manager using this system. However, you also want your sales engineers to be on the same page. So then the sales demo playbook could be designed more towards the sales engineer, or maybe even have two separate sales playbooks, or have one in which they're both using the same content and questions. And by the way, guys, if you have any questions, then feel free to post them in the questions channel. There is always a good moment to ask them. So as you can see, I can as a sales manager or as a content editor, I can easily switch between these chapters, make any changes that I want to both content and to checklist, and move across my playbook, and then make this. So as soon as I'm happy with all the changes I did, I can hit on publish. And as soon as I hit on publish, it becomes available to all my employees that I've given access to the system. So then whenever they go to their library, this playbook is now using the latest version of the changes that we just did. As soon as they start an instance, so let's pretend that that Sony deal is so specific that we want that we don't want to modify our master template, because our default sales process is our default sales process. But because this is Sony, we want to make changes into the existing playbook. Then I can hit the tab running playbooks, and then I can scroll to, or I can perform a search actually, but let me just browse to it. We can browse to that playbook, and then I can open it up and edit it. I can't find it very quickly, so I'm just gonna edit this one here. I can edit it, and now I am editing this specific instance. So I'm not making any changes to my master. I'm just leaving my master as the default, which means that by default we have a standardized process. But we're gonna agree that because Apple is such a specific prospect, that the sales team, we're gonna modify the content and also our checklists over here to be very specific for this opportunity. So this can be very useful if you work on very large deals that require a different approach depending on the type of prospect that you're going to do, and make it highly flexible. Of course, if during an edit like this you realize what I'm writing now should also be applied to my master, then you can quickly open up the master, even in a separate tab if you wanted to, and copy paste the changes between those items. So you can easily copy entire paragraphs or entire pages between your different sales playbooks. I'm wondering in the audience, and maybe you guys can type it in the chat. Do you at the moment use playbooks, sales playbooks? And if you do, would you mind typing in what technology you use to create and then to distribute them to your end users? I'm curious to see what you guys are using at the moment, if you're using anything at all.
Yeah, and with end users, you mean your salespeople, basically. Because you can also see your prospect as an end user, and maybe in the future we will also develop features to work together with your customer on a sales playbook. But that's something for the future. Annemarie says yes, we use playbooks, but no tech. So no specific technology. So Annemarie, does that mean that you're using some kind of text editor like Google Docs or Word?
Perhaps a PowerPoint or a wiki. I've seen a wiki page happen as well. At Servoy, I used to have a wiki, and in that wiki I had a whole bunch of definitions. What's the definition of a funnel? When are you in what percentage of the funnel? And while it is an important resource that salespeople can then go to, I found that they were not using it, and that was like the main challenge, because it's a wiki, and you only go to a wiki when you're looking for information. It's very hard for you as a sales manager to then enforce that your people are actually and effectively using the steps that you as a manager have designed to run a sales playbook.
Yes, and Annemarie is now driving in the meantime, so drive safe, Annemarie.
Yeah.
And indeed, she was using wikis and in Pipedrive, and Gijs is also using Pipedrive or was using Pipedrive in his former position, and try to integrate some of the checklist questions into Pipedrive as well, into the client profiles. And Michael asked, would love to see the templates out of structuring for extreme revenue growth in this setup, sort of best of both worlds. Yeah, cool. Michiel, that sounds good. We will try to come up with different sales playbooks based on different sales methodologies, because a lot of the listeners of my other podcast are listening to Jacco van der Kooi from Winning by Design. He's also a huge fan of playbooks, and we will probably come up with several playbooks, several sales methodologies to add here. So that's cool. Also using Pipedrive. So Pipedrive is a real winner here.
Okay. Well, Pipedrive has a pretty good API, so that will help our tech team to do integrations fairly quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Okay, we didn't get further questions, so maybe it's time to wrap up, Jan, or do you have something to show yet?
Well, we still have 5 minutes. There's one more very small playbook that I'd briefly like to show, and this is a suggestion. So I found, in particular in my years at Survey, where I built up a sales force starting from nothing. So initially, when we started Survey 20 years ago, I was the only guy in sales, and eventually I grew it to about 40 people. So there was quite a journey to go through. One of the most powerful things I found to encourage and motivate and train and coach your sales employees is for them to do a daily journal. So I started drafting yesterday. I had some spare time as I was building the sales playbook, and I thought the daily sales behavior is really a critical one. And so the sales playbook itself, as you guys have seen, is like 10 chapters and a lot of checklists. This daily sales behavior is really a very tiny playbook, and with the idea that you run this as a sales employee every morning that you come into the office. It takes you 5 minutes. You begin your day with your daily sales behavior. So as a sales guy, you come in, you hit run, you give it a name. By default, it gives it a name, which is actually in this case is quite useful. So this is like journaling, but then digitally. That's roughly the way you should see it. It's only 3 quick chapters. So as you can see, it's not finished as well. I'm still in the edit mode, but I like it so much I wanted to show it to you. So it begins with, how do you start your day? And there's a movie here of The Miracle Morning, which I'm a big fan of. Again, you should find something that fits within your company, your culture, and your people and your team. And really, by writing these things down, what is my gratitude of the day? I had great coffee, or I'm feeling fantastic. And then what is my attitude of today? By writing those things down, you're really enforcing it in your brain to then also use it throughout the day. Then what I like my sales teams to do is briefly write down what their eventual goal is, break it down to what my daily activities should be, and then at the beginning of the day say, this is what I'm going to do today. And it should be brief. Today I'm going to do 5 calls, 10 LinkedIn reach outs, 2 meetings, done. And then at the end of the day, you journal and you write down, how was my identity? In this case, what we really try to focus on is how can you separate your identity from your role, which for your mental health is very critical. Don't let a sales failure impact your personal well-being. And journaling is by far the most powerful way in training your brain to have a good separation between your identity, which is your personal role, and your professional role, which we call the R, the role. So this is an example I put into examples here, so that when people begin with this, they have some sort of example on how they can journal. And again, you have to discuss for yourself, do you want your employees to share this with you, or do you want them to just keep it personal? That's up to you and your team. But if they do this, then you can also coach them. Let's say they're always having a very negative journaling style, then there's probably something mentally not great with them. And this is time for you as a manager to help them with coaching on a regular basis to figure out, why are they journaling in such a negative way? And maybe it's something silly, like the coffee in the office is not tasting very well, and because of that, I'm not able to do my work properly. I personally have that. If there's terrible coffee, then my day just starts terrible. So sometimes very simple things can change the performance of your sales team. So this is a tiny playbook that you, as a sales team, can run every day. I'll be sharing this template with you. Feel free to use it. It takes 2 or 3 minutes at the beginning and the end of your day, and it really helps you to perform better and to feel better at the same time. All right. I hope this was useful, Johan.
Well, that was really helpful. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, no further questions. So yeah, if you don't have anything to add, then yeah, let's wrap up. Yeah, thank you for coming, for your questions and comments, and really looking forward to see you again next time. Stay in touch via Inside Playbookify, inside.playbookify.io to see what we are doing.
Yeah, I see now the benefit of not using a PowerPoint, Johan. It saves us 15 minutes on a webinar. Yes. And the attendees as well, they get less bored. No PowerPoints.
That's a new element of our playbook. No PowerPoint.
Yeah, reduce the amount of PowerPoints. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks all for attending. And yeah, if you have follow-up questions, feel free to post them on inside.playbookify.io. There are also easy ways there to start new topics, I think, Johan, or not?
Yes, absolutely. Perfect.
Okay. Great. Cool. Well, thanks all.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.